Hi, and welcome to the lesson, Keep It Small and Simple. Who else to teach us this lesson but space explorers, right? So, in the 1990s, NASA had an initiative called the Faster, Better, Cheaper Initiative, or FBC. Really, the emphasis here was on keeping things small. So I would call this Keep It Small, Silly. These examples that I pulled from Dan Ward's book, Fire, are great evidence about how reducing the size of projects can increase performance in a portfolio extremely well. So the details are that NASA during the 1990s decided to really reduce the scope and the intensity of management around their spacecraft missions. And they did this especially for missions that didn't have people, that were all about exploring space. As a result, NASA was able to launch 16 missions for the price of one, and 10 of those missions were extremely successful. They included 5 trips to Mars, a trip to the Moon, 4 Earth orbiting satellites, and 1 asteroid rendezvous. Together, these missions accounted for 10 wins for the price of one. We have 2 examples that we like to talk about. The first one we're going to talk about is the Shoemaker Asteroid Rendezvous. But before we get into talking about the asteroid rendezvous, let's take a look at the principles of the FBC initiative. The FBC initiative was implemented by Dan Goldin, and what his emphasis was on was focusing on allowing failure and allowing speed and new processes to come into NASA when NASA was at the time a very old traditional organization. The rules that were affected said that you could do things wrong, failure was okay, and you could build dirty prototypes and keep going. You were allowed to reject good ideas. That means that if someone came with additional work to add on to your project, that didn't mean that you necessarily had to accept the new work. You could say, nope, that's not part of the mission. We are totally focused on rendezvousing with this asteroid, or totally focused on catching stardust from a comet. Then they also said that you had to simplify and accelerate everything. That meant reducing all the management overhead and really empowering the teams. This was a major effort by Dan. They also wanted to limit the amount of innovation. This is the idea of reducing the number of miracles on a project to just one through using a lot of reuse of older technologies that were overbuilt. And then lastly, failure was an option. You could fail. It was no longer a zero failure, no fault policy that was existing in NASA before. This allowed for NASA to move faster and to explore. The best success of this was actually a NASA Shoemaker mission. In this mission, the Shoemaker spacecraft traveled over 2 billion miles, which is a record-setting distance at the time. It collected 10 times the data it was intended to. It only cost 2/3 of its original budget, only 122 million instead of 200 million. Mind you that most spacecraft of its type before would cost almost 10 or 12 times that. It landed on the asteroid Eros that it was supposed to fly by, and it was never designed to be a lander. And it continued to ride that asteroid, taking readings on an ongoing basis and getting an increase in the sensitivity of the readings as a result of being so close. This is a really good example of when something goes right, you get a lot of benefits together. It's a virtuous cycle of everything either works or it doesn't. And in this case, it worked really well. So I've given you a link here, which you can use to see a simulation of the Shoemaker spacecraft. You're going to see how the Shoemaker was slungshot and able to land on the asteroid, which again, was never intended to be done, and just how impressive it was for this to be done after 2 billion miles of travel. I hope that this is an inspiring lesson, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks.